4 through 20 of Revelation. And what that meant was that the bulk of Revelation was actually something that was written in Hebrew or Aramaic first. And these are actually the sections that don't really have Jesus doing much. Jesus is like an afterthought. He's only mentioned a few times, and when he is mentioned, it's like it says God does something and Jesus does something. Like it's pretty clear that like there's an edit there. Jesus doesn't really do much. But Jesus does quite a bit, and he is mentioned in the chapters before it and the chapters after it.
So it could have been like an apocryphal text that was just about like the day of the Lord, but not specifically the day of the Christian Lord. And then later Christian authors turned it into their mythos.
Yep. So it's something that's written in Hebrew or Aramaic and could have been written for Nero. Doesn't really matter. But then it's co-opted later on and translated into Greek. And we can tell using the stylometry that like the person or the bulk of it was originally in Hebrew or Aramaic first, but the chapters before it and afterwards they were originally in Greek. So we don't know if who wrote those chapters is the person who translated it. We have no idea. But someone translates it into Greek and then adds some chapters to it, or they get added.
Okay, that makes sense. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, so it's not like it was all written like in its complete form all at once.
No.
Okay,
yeah. Part of it's written. It could likely be written in the time of Nero or shortly at like 90s or something. Here recently, my co-author Matthew was taking a look at what some people were talking about, the possibility of instead of it being about Nero, it could have been about Hadrian, which would have been even more wild. But it just,
What's the dating for Hadrian?
Hadrian was, I think he starts in 118 or so.
Okay, so it'd be much later.
And then he stops in like the 130s. Yeah, 117 to 138. He replaces Trajan. Yeah. So Trajan is 98 to 117, and Hadrian is 117 to 138.
Okay.
They had some.
So
Trajan and Hadrian were actually pretty good emperors. Like they're pretty good emperors. Like to the point to where like they were able to survive that.
When you're using stylometry like stylo, Oh, sorry, I had a bad connection for a second. I wasn't trying to talk over you. But when you use stylometric analysis like stylo, does it already have like a corpus of information that it's pulling from, like a large language model, or is it only the text that you're putting in?
It's only the text you're putting in.
Okay, so like it doesn't know like, hey, Homer wrote these things,
No.
Shakespeare wrote these things, or whatever. Like you have to give it that, and then it.
So there's supervised and unsupervised methods of stylometry. Supervised methods is where you say, hey, this is a known author, so go and find things that match this style. We felt like that was super unscientific because it comes into it with a presupposition. Because we don't know what it is. You find the connections for us, and then we'll try to use context clues to try to work backwards. And see, that's the thing. A lot of people don't know that there's multiple parts that go into it. Stylometry doesn't just tell us, oh, hey, the Gospel of Luke is written, like the bulk of Luke is from Evangeline, like from Marcion. Like it doesn't tell us that just immediately. So what we have to do is we have to try to figure out what the fuck's going on when it shows us that there's two authors in Luke. We have to try to figure out what the fuck's going on when it shows us there's two sections or what appears to be two authors of two authors of Revelation. Like we have to figure out what does that mean? How do we come to this? Like how is this working? Why is it doing this? And so
okay.
I think that a lot of people will come up here and they'll hang their hat on the idea of like stylometry, and they'll be like, "Oh, stylometry doesn't do that." And it's like, well, yeah, that's why we're using stylometry alongside like historical references. We're using stylometry alongside our knowledge of and information that we have from church fathers. You have to understand church history, and like you have to understand like religious history and the data science in order to actually get to this. Like we're not just using one pronged approach. That's dumb.
I've heard Dr. Joshua Bowen talk about the composition of Genesis being several different writings that were later compiled and written together as one story. That's why you'll see like the creation myth, in chapter 1, and then a different creation myth with different days in like chapter 2 and 3. Um, does your analysis show, like, have you ran Genesis and seen
Yes, that's our next project, and I can tell you, crap. So we reached out to Joshua Bowen. I probably need to reach out to him again, just to kind of have him, read what we're looking at and everything like that. But no, it's more indicative of. So we. How do I put this without going up against Bowen? Because I love Bowen. I think he's a great guy, very, very smart. So what we are seeing is less of an idea. So, okay. He is basing some of his thought off of something called the documentary hypothesis? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah, the documentary. Yeah. Well, I usually refer to it as JPD. Anyways, so the documentary hypothesis. It's the idea that there's different like ideas of God and different theologies from different sects of Judaism at different points in time that put the story together, and it's kind of like a Frankenstein's monster. You have Genesis is like you have one creation story, and then later on you get another creation story, and it's all presented in one or not gospel, but one text. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When in reality, what we see is instead of different groups like putting in input later on, like over time, instead it's different groups kind of working together, and acknowledging that there are different ideas of how this stuff comes to be. Because when they decide, or when they put together the Old Testament, there's not any, like when they write the text themselves, not everybody is on the same page, and they kind of recognize that. I guess it's more of, in my opinion, it's technically better. It sheds a better light on the authors of the Torah, because instead of people over time almost like disagreeing with each other and just like shoving shit in later on, into the text, instead it's the Jewish people sitting down and going, hey, we have this particular view of what happens. What do you have? Okay, and you have this view. Let's work together and let's put this together. And sometimes we're going to have two stories that don't necessarily line up with each other, but we're going to put them in there at the same time. They're working together and acknowledging different beliefs, slightly different beliefs, because there isn't one sole belief prior to this, because that's why they're writing the text. They're first establishing the story. They're trying to put together the story.
Looking at the text as like one univocal text that like is all in agreement with each other is a very Christian worldview. Like whenever you actually study like what rabbis do, their whole job is to argue about these things and give different opinions and share their school of thought. That's why, like, even during the time of Jesus, you have all these different sects. You have like the Pharisees, Sadducees, the Essenes, and everything, because they're all looking at the text differently and sharing different opinions.
Okay, and I think the the thing to kind of think about, like with the Old Testament, is, I mean, before they write the stories, not everyone's on the same page. So it's very reasonable that even when they write them, not everyone who's taking part in the writing is going to be on the same page, because there's nothing to go off of. Really, I mean, there's not much to go off of before it. You know what I mean? The only real way that you could assume that people were on the same page, like the Jewish people, at least at a particular time, were all on the same page when they decided to write their sections of the Old Testament, is if you assign oral tradition to the stories. But oral tradition itself is just hard to show, and we just don't have any evidence that people were all on the same page prior.
Well, see, that's kind of why I asked the question about, like, does Stylo have like information already stored in it about authorship? Because the book of Genesis has been presented as one document for so long that like if you were to ask like a large language model, of course it's going to attribute that as one book because
Yeah.
that's how it's presented. That's the only
Right.
form that we have of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very cool, very cool.
But yeah, our
Um,
next book is over. Our next book is over the Old Testament and everything like that. So we do actually talk about this actually a bit. I'm trying to see here if I can find. Let's see, because if I can find that particular section, because Matthew wrote most of this next book, so heads up, it's going to be a hell of a book. But I'm trying to. Let's see here. So, all right. So, one of our main points in our book over the Old Testament, in our research on it, is that it has a lot of Greek influence on it, which means that it's written a little later than people thought. And again, we make a very, very good, solid claim for this with evidence and stuff like that, like archaeological evidence and stuff like that that lines up with it. But anyways, what we see is that there's a particular book from Plato, or writing a text from Plato called Timaeus. And in Timaeus, there are two creation accounts, like a creation of the world. So there's Timaeus 29d through 40d. That's how they, like, their sections or passages are titled. And then Timaeus 40d through 47e. And the first is an account of the demiurge, like a creator god, creating the universe, including the lower gods that we generally think about when we think of the Greek gods, such as like Zeus or Athena. Like, well, anyway, lower than the demiurge. And then the second account, on the other hand, is specifically focused on explaining the origins of earthly life. While this is implied in the first account, it is more drawn out in detail in the second account, in which the task is given to the lower gods who were created by the demiurge. These two accounts clash in certain ways, but we can nonetheless understand that the author was a singular person writing what he wanted, even if it doesn't seem to perfectly line up. And that's how literature, philosophy, and myth work. And so there's a scholar, his name's Russell Gmirkin, the late Russell Gmirkin, and he went further. He said, showing that the shift in names between the two Genesis creation accounts actually match the logic in Plato's Timaeus. So Genesis 1:1 through 2:3 uses Elohim, whereas the second creation story, starting in 2:4, it uses Yahweh Elohim. The Septuagint likewise demonstrates shifts in the name usage. Yahweh Elohim in Gmirkin's interpretation is actually a distinct terrestrial deity that was created by Elohim. And this later got misunderstood, and the two gods merged into being understood as a singular deity. So it's not really that it's coming from two different people from two different sects of Jewish thought from different times. It's that it's people working together and coming up with what they thought of for the creation, and they're all working together. And so we do have things that we would consider contradictory. And I mean, they are, but it's based on material that they already had before. Like it still follows the same like path that other writings of the creation, like from Plato, had followed previously.
I got you. Well, hey man, I appreciate your time. I gotta hop down, but yeah, you have a good day.
Yep. Thank you.